This bear steals everything. You won't believe what this sneaky little thief stole next." The first light of dawn crept through the ponderosa pines, casting long shadows across the valley floor. Sarah Mason stood on the wooden porch of the main cabin, clutching a steaming mug of coffee between her chilled hands. The crisp Montana morning air filled her lungs as she surveyed the sprawling property of Wild at Heart Wildlife Sanctuary. 10 years ago, this had been nothing but an abandoned ranch. Now it was home to dozens of creatures who couldn't survive in the wild, victims of poaching, illegal pet trade, accidents, and human cruelty. As the sanctuary's founder and director, Sarah had seen it all: eagles with clipped wings, wolves raised in captivity, even a one-eyed mountain lion rescued from a roadside zoo. But none had prepared her for what waited in the quarantine building that morning. "Sarah, he's awake," called Dr. Mike Reeves, the sanctuary's veterinarian, his voice crackling through the walkie-talkie clipped to her belt. Sarah drained her coffee and set off down the gravel path. When she reached the quarantine building, a converted barn with modern medical equipment, she found Mike hunched over a small cage lined with blankets. Inside, a black bear cub no more than 4 months old huddled in the corner, trembling. "How's our little survivor?" Sarah asked, approaching slowly. Mike straightened, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Dehydrated, malnourished, and traumatized, but physically he'll recover. Mentally." He shook his head. It was hard to say. The cub had been found 3 days ago by forest rangers, barricaded inside a hollow tree trunk beside his mother's body. The mother bear had been killed by poachers who took only her gallbladder and paws, leaving her cub to starve. By the time the rangers found him, the little bear had been alone for at least 4 days. "He's got a strong will to live," Mike said. Rangers said the tree hollow entrance was partially blocked with branches. The little guy must have dragged them there himself, trying to protect himself. Sarah knelt by the cage, speaking in soft tones. "Hey there, little one." The cub's eyes, bright with fear and intelligence, locked onto hers. He made a soft rumbling sound, not quite a growl, more like a whimper with a hint of defiance. "What should we call him?" Mike asked. Sarah studied the small black bear. Despite his trauma, there was something uniquely present in his gaze, a spark that went beyond mere animal survival instinct. "Moki," she said finally. Mike raised an eyebrow. "It was my grandmother's nickname for me when I was little. She said I was always hiding things away like a little pack rat." Sarah smiled at the memory. "It means one who saves things in her native language." "Fitting." Mike nodded. "Well, Moki, welcome to Wild at Heart." As if understanding, the bear cub gave another soft rumble. 3 weeks later, Sarah wished she'd chosen a different name. Moki had graduated from the quarantine building to a spacious enclosure designed specifically for bear cubs. The space had logs to climb, a small pool, and plenty of natural foliage. It should have been perfect. Instead, it had become the epicenter of the sanctuary's strangest mysteries. "It happened again," grumbled Hank, the grizzled caretaker who managed the sanctuary's maintenance. He stood in Sarah's office, holding up a work glove found buried under a pile of leaves in Moki's enclosure. "It's the 3rd one this week." Sarah sighed. "I'll add it to the collection." The collection was a cardboard box in her office labeled Moki's Treasures, already containing a dish towel, 2 unmatched socks, a hairbrush, an empty bottle of cologne, and a tattered paperback novel that had been left too close to the enclosure fence. "That bear's got sticky paws," Hank said, dropping the glove into the box. "Never seen anything like it." Dr. Patel mentioned something similar with rescued pandas, Sarah recalled. They sometimes fixate on objects with human scent, especially orphan cubs. It's a comfort mechanism. Well, comfort or not, we need to find a way to stop it. Volunteers are complaining about missing items. Later that afternoon, Sarah observed Moki from the elevated walkway that allowed staff to monitor the enclosures without disturbing the animals. The black bear cub had grown noticeably in just 3 weeks. His coat was shinier, his movements more confident as he explored his surroundings. What caught Sarah's attention, however, was his behavior with the objects he'd accumulated. In a far corner of the enclosure, partially hidden by a fallen log, Moki had created what could only be described as a nest. The strange collection included the missing items plus natural materials, leaves, twigs, and grass. He wasn't just randomly stealing things, he was carefully arranging them. "It's called a comfort cache," said a voice behind her. Sarah turned to find Emily Chen, their newest veterinary intern, a bright-eyed graduate student from UC Davis. "I've been reading about it," Emily continued, joining Sarah at the railing. "When bear cubs lose their mothers, they sometimes collect objects with strong scents. In the wild, it would be things like rotting logs or aromatic plants. In captivity, they improvise with what's available." Sarah finished, understanding dawning. "So he's not just being mischievous." "No. Look how he arranges everything." Emily pointed as Moki carefully adjusted a flannel shirt, source unknown, in his nest. "He's creating a scent bubble, a safe space that smells familiar. It's his way of dealing with the loss of his mother." "Yeah." Sarah watched the cub with new understanding. "So we shouldn't stop him." Emily hesitated. "Well, we can't have him taking visitors' belongings, but maybe we could provide alternatives, fabric scraps with safe scents, old towels, things like that." For the next week, they tried Emily's suggestion, placing scented items, towels used by staff, worn-out blankets, even sachets of herbs, near Moki's enclosure. Some disappeared into his collection, but the little bear continued his raids whenever opportunity presented itself. The breaking point came during a school tour when Moki somehow managed to snag a teacher's scarf through the fence, dragging it triumphantly to his nest while 32 third graders erupted in delighted giggles. "We need a better solution," Sarah admitted to her team during their weekly meeting. "The board is already nervous about next month's fundraising gala. If Moki makes off with Ms. Ainsworth's purse, we can kiss that matching donation goodbye." Miss Eleanor Ainsworth was the widow of a timber magnate and the sanctuary's most generous benefactor. She had pledged to match all donations raised during the annual gala, potentially up to $500,000. It was money the sanctuary desperately needed for their planned expansion to accommodate more rescues. "What if we move him to the back enclosures until after the gala?" suggested Hank. "No," Sarah said firmly. "Moki's one of our success stories. Besides, Mrs. Ainsworth specifically mentioned wanting to see him after that article in the local paper." The article had featured Moki's rescue story, dubbing him the collector of wild at heart. The publicity had already increased visitor donations. "What about a behavioral modification program?" Dr. Mike suggested. "We could work on teaching him which items are acceptable to collect." "That could take months," Emily pointed out. "The gala's in 3 weeks. Then we'll have to bear-proof the event," Sarah decided. Extra fencing around his enclosure, staff positioned strategically, and everyone warned to keep personal items secure. "Meanwhile, Emily, you and I will work with Moki daily. If we can't change his behavior by the gala, maybe we can at least channel it. 2 weeks later, Sarah began to think they were making progress. Moki still collected scented items, but now he accepted substitutes they provided, sachets of lavender, old t-shirts sprayed with diluted essential oils, even stuffed toys that had been left in the donation bin. More importantly, he was thriving physically. The once skeletal cub now weighed a healthy 30 pounds, his black coat gleaming in the summer sun. He'd even begun forming relationships with the sanctuary staff, recognizing individuals and responding differently to each person. With Emily, he was playful, rolling on his back when she approached. With Hank, he was more cautious but attentive. And with Sarah, he displayed an almost protective attitude, once growling at a maintenance worker who approached her too quickly. "He's bonding," Emily observed one evening as they finished their daily session with Moki. "It's remarkable for a wild bear." "He's not really wild, though, is he?" Sarah mused, watching as Moki carefully placed a lavender sachet in his ever-growing nest. "He was too young when he lost his mother. He's imprinting on us." "Is that a problem?" Sarah asked. "It could be," Emily said. "The goal is always to release rescues back into the wild when possible." "And if it's not possible?" The question hung in the air. Many of Wild at Heart's residents were permanent, too habituated to humans or too physically compromised to survive in the wild. "Is that Moki's fate?" "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," Sarah said finally. "For now, let's focus on getting through the gala without incident." As they left the enclosure, neither noticed Moki watching them intently, his bright eyes following their movements until they disappeared from view. The day before the gala brought chaos to Wild at Heart. Volunteers hustled about stringing lights in the trees surrounding the main pavilion, arranging tables, and setting up the silent auction displays. The normally peaceful sanctuary hummed with activity. Sarah supervised it all with a growing knot of anxiety in her stomach. Everything had to be perfect. Mrs. Ainsworth wasn't just their biggest donor, she was also on the State Wildlife Commission. Her influence could help or hinder the sanctuary's upcoming permit renewal for endangered species rehabilitation. Sarah's thoughts were cut short by Emily's voice. The young intern was jogging toward her, face flushed with excitement. "You have to see this." "What's wrong?" "Is it Moki?" "Nothing's wrong, just come." Curious, Sarah followed Emily to Moki's enclosure. The bear cub was engaged in what appeared to be a major renovation of his nest. He methodically arranged his collection, seeming to group items by type, fabric items in one section, objects with food scents in another. "He's organizing," Emily whispered. "I've been watching for an hour." "He's creating categories." That was unexpected, Sarah struggled to find the word. "It's more than that. It's problem-solving behavior we rarely see in bears his age." Most black bear cubs his age would still be with their mothers, learning basic survival skills. Moki's developing his own systems. Sarah watched in fascination as Moki carefully placed a pine cone. Where had he gotten that, besides several others? Then covered them with a dishcloth. The trauma of losing his mother so violently might have triggered accelerated development, Emily suggested. Or maybe he's just special. "Special is one word for it," Sarah murmured, remembering the growing list of missing items. Just that morning, one of the volunteers had reported a missing tube of lipstick last seen near Moki's enclosure. As they watched, Moki suddenly stiffened, nose twitching. He abandoned his nest arranging and moved to the edge of his enclosure, pressing his nose against the fence. What's he sensing? Sarah wondered. Emily frowned, not sure. The wind's coming from the direction of the quarantine building. Is there a new arrival I don't know about? Just the golden retriever puppy animal control brought in yesterday, hit and run case. He's stable but weak. Sarah made a mental note to check on the puppy later. For now, the gala preparations demanded her attention. Keep an eye on Moki, she told Emily. If he shows any signs of stress with all this activity, we may need to move him temporarily after all. Emily nodded, her gaze still fixed on the bear cub who remained at attention, nose working the air currents from the direction of the quarantine building. By evening, the sanctuary was transformed. Solar-powered fairy lights twinkled in the trees surrounding the main pavilion. Tables draped in natural linen held centerpieces of local wildflowers. A small stage had been erected for the speeches and auction. Everything was perfect. Sarah had just finished her final inspection when her walkie-talkie crackled. "Sarah, it's Mike. We have a situation at the civet enclosure." Heart sinking, Sarah grabbed her emergency kit and hurried across the sanctuary grounds. The civets, small cat-like mammals rescued from an illegal exotic pet dealer, were among their more sensitive residents. Any disruption to their routine could cause significant stress. She found Mike kneeling beside a still form on the ground near the enclosure. "Emily." Sarah gasped, rushing forward. "She's okay," Mike said quickly. "Fainted, low blood sugar. I think she mentioned skipping lunch to help with the preparations." As if on cue, Emily's eyes fluttered open. "What? Mike, you fainted?" Sarah explained, helping her sit up slowly. "When was the last time you ate?" Emily looked embarrassed. "Breakfast. I got caught up with," a crash interrupted her, followed by a series of short urgent growls. All three turned to see Moki somehow free from his enclosure, barreling toward them with surprising speed for his size. "How did he get out?" Mike exclaimed, moving protectively in front of Emily. But Moki wasn't charging at them. He skidded to a stop several feet away, rose on his hind legs, and let out another series of growls. Looking back the way he'd come, he wanted them to follow him. Sarah realized the strange behavior triggered a memory of a documentary she'd once seen about an elephant trying to lead humans to an injured calf. "That's ridiculous," Mike began, but Emily cut him off. "No, she's right. Look at his body language." Indeed, Moki had dropped to all fours and taken a few steps away, then turned back to look at them expectantly. "Stay with Emily," Sarah told Mike, then cautiously began following the bear cub. Moki led her to his enclosure, where Sarah was shocked to discover the access gate ajar. Beyond it, the wooden door to the storage shed had been smashed open. "Moki, what did you do?" she murmured, carefully approaching the damaged door. Inside, she found chaos. Supplies were scattered across the floor, and a small space heater had tipped over, its power cord frayed where it connected to the wall outlet. Sparks occasionally jumped from the damaged cord. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, immediately unplugging the heater. The shed contained cleaning supplies, including several flammable liquids. If left unchecked, the sparking cord could have started a devastating fire. She turned to find Moki watching her from the doorway, his intelligent eyes seeming to ask if she understood the danger he'd detected. "You knew," she whispered. "Somehow you knew." Later, after securing Moki back in his properly latched enclosure and explaining the situation to Mike and a recovered Emily, Sarah sat alone on the porch of the main cabin trying to process what had happened. The bear cub had not only escaped his enclosure but had deliberately sought help for a dangerous situation. It went beyond instinct or conditioning. It showed a level of awareness and problem-solving that challenged everything Sarah thought she knew about wildlife rehabilitation. As the first stars appeared in the darkening Montana sky, Sarah made a decision. Moki wasn't just another rescue. He was something special, the bridge between the wild world and their human one. Somehow, she would find a way to honor that uniqueness while keeping both Moki and the sanctuary safe. With renewed determination, she headed inside to finalize her preparations for tomorrow's gala. Whatever challenges Moki presented, she was increasingly certain that he had come into their lives for a reason. The morning of the gala dawned clear and brilliant, the kind of perfect Montana summer day that made Sarah remember why she'd chosen this remote valley for the sanctuary. Sunlight filtered through the pine trees, casting dappled shadows across the grounds as volunteers made last-minute preparations. Sarah had been up since dawn, her mind racing with everything that needed to be done. The incident with Moki the previous evening had added another layer of complexity to an already stressful day. She doubled the checks on his enclosure and assigned 2 volunteers to monitor him throughout the event. "Everything's under control," Mike assured her as they walked the grounds together. "The caterers are set up, the silent auction displays look great, and even Moki is on his best behavior." They paused at the bear cub's enclosure. Moki was lounging on a log, seemingly oblivious to the activity around him, but Sarah knew better. His ears twitched at every new sound, and his nose constantly tested the air. "I've been thinking about what happened yesterday," Mike said, lowering his voice though no one was nearby. "It's remarkable but not unprecedented. There are documented cases of animals alerting humans to danger. This was different," Sarah insisted. "He didn't just alert us. He broke out of a secured enclosure, deliberately sought us out, and then led me directly to the problem. That shows intention, planning." Mike adjusted his glasses, a habit when he was thinking. "I won't argue it's unusual, but we need to be careful about anthropomorphizing. He's still a wild animal." "Is he, though?" Sarah mused, watching as Moki rolled onto his back, paws in the air. "He was barely weaned when his mother was killed. Everything he knows about being a bear, he's had to figure out on his own or learn from us, which makes him potentially dangerous," Mike pointed out gently. "Not now, but eventually. Black bears can reach 600 pounds. His fixation on human sense, his comfort around people, these aren't traits that will serve him well in the wild." The unspoken question hung between them: what would happen to Moki when he outgrew the sanctuary's ability to safely house him? "One problem at a time," Sarah said finally. "Let's get through today first." By 4 o'clock, guests began arriving. Board members in casual summer finery, local supporters, and a few celebrities who maintained ranches in the area all came with checkbooks ready, drawn by the sanctuary's growing reputation and the promise of matching funds from Mrs. Ainsworth. The guest of honor arrived precisely at 4:30, stepping out of a modest hybrid SUV that belied her considerable wealth. Ella Ainsworth was in her 70s, silver-haired and straight-backed, dressed in linen slacks and a turquoise blouse. The only hint of her fortune was the antique pearl brooch pinned to her collar, a family heirloom she wore to every important occasion. "Sarah, dear," she greeted, clasping Sarah's hands warmly. "What a wonderful turnout, and the sanctuary looks magnificent. We're so honored you could come." Sarah replied, genuinely pleased to see the older woman. Despite her wealth and influence, Mrs. Ainsworth had always treated Sarah and the sanctuary staff with respect rather than condescension. Now, before the formal festivities begin, I simply must see this famous bear cub I've been reading about, Mrs. Ainsworth declared. The collector they're calling him, such a charming story. Sarah exchanged a quick glance with Mike, who nodded reassuringly. Of course. We've just finished a special observation platform near his enclosure. You'll have an excellent view. As they walked, Sarah gave Mrs. Ainsworth updates on the sanctuary's recent rescues and successes. The older woman listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about rehabilitation techniques and release rates. The work you do here is so important, Mrs. Ainsworth said as they approached Moi's enclosure. In my husband's day, the timber industry saw wildlife as an inconvenience at best, a threat at worst. How far we've come in understanding the balance needed between human progress and natural conservation. They reached the newly constructed viewing platform, where a small group of guests had already gathered. Emily stood nearby, providing information about black bears in the wild. And here's our star resident, Sarah said, gesturing to the enclosure where Moki was visible, investigating a puzzle feeder designed to stimulate his problem-solving skills. Oh my, Mrs. Ainsworth breathed, clearly charmed by the bear cub. He's absolutely magnificent, so young to have endured such trauma. As if sensing her attention, Moki abandoned his puzzle and ambled toward the fence, curious about the new visitors. He's quite interested in people, Sarah explained. More so than most wild bears. We believe it's related to his early trauma and the comfort he finds in human scent. Mrs. Ainsworth moved closer to the edge of the platform. Hello there, little one, she called softly. To everyone's surprise, Moki rose on his hind legs, pressing his paws against the fence as he studied Mrs. Ainsworth. His nose twitched rapidly, catching her scent. He likes your perfume, Emily observed with a smile. Shalimar, Mrs. Ainsworth confirmed. I've worn it for 50 years. My late husband always said he could find me in a crowded room just by following that scent. The moment was perfect, the elegant benefactor connecting with the sanctuary's most charismatic resident. Sarah could almost see the checkbooks opening around them. Then several things happened at once. A server approached with a tray of champagne flutes. Mrs. Ainsworth turned to accept one, leaning slightly over the railing. Moi, still fascinated by her scent, stretched further upward. Mrs. Ainsworth, careful, Sarah began, but it was too late. With a movement so quick it was barely visible, Moi's paw darted through a gap in the fence. There was a tug, a soft snap, and then the bear cub dropped back to all fours, something glinting in his mouth before he darted to the far corner of his enclosure. My brooch. Mrs. Ainsworth gasped, her hand flying to her collar where the pearl heirloom had been pinned moments before. The platform erupted in confused exclamations. Sarah's heart sank as she watched Moi disappear into his shelter, the stolen treasure clutched firmly in his mouth. I am so terribly sorry, Mrs. Ainsworth, she said, mortification washing over her. We'll get it back immediately. But recovering the brooch proved easier said than done. Moki had retreated into his interior den, and Sarah was reluctant to send anyone inside to search. Despite his small size and generally good temperament, he was still a wild animal, and his den was his most secure space. We could tranquilize him, Mike suggested in a hushed conference away from the guests. Absolutely not, Sarah replied firmly. The risk is too high, and it would betray his trust. Then what do you suggest? That brooch is practically priceless. Sarah glanced over at Mrs. Ainsworth, who was being comforted by board members. To her surprise, the older woman didn't seem angry, concerned, yes, but not furious as Sarah had expected. "Give me until after dinner," Sarah decided. "The speeches aren't scheduled until 8. If we haven't recovered it by then, I'll make a full apology and offer compensation." Mike looked dubious but nodded. "I'll try to keep her distracted for the next hour." Sarah and Emily took turns observing Moki's enclosure, hoping he would emerge with the brooch or at least give them a glimpse of where he might have hidden it. The bear cub eventually came out but showed no signs of still having the jewelry. "He must have added it to his collection," Emily said. "But where? We've identified 3 different nests in his enclosure, and he could have created more that we haven't found." The situation seemed hopeless as the dinner hour approached. Sarah reluctantly prepared to face Mrs. Ainsworth with the bad news. The loss of the brooch and likely the matching donation would be a devastating blow to the sanctuary. She was heading toward the pavilion when Hank intercepted her, his weathered face unusually animated. "That new pup in quarantine," he said without preamble, "the retriever, something's wrong." Sarah's concern immediately shifted. "What is it?" "Not eating. Doc Mike's tied up with the guests. Emily asked me to find you." Pushing thoughts of the missing brooch aside, Sarah hurried to the quarantine building. The golden retriever puppy Pip, as the staff had started calling him, had been rescued from a ditch beside a rural highway 3 days earlier. He'd sustained a broken leg and ribs, likely from being struck by a vehicle, but had been improving steadily until now. She found Emily in the treatment room, cradling the small puppy in a blanket. Pip's eyes were dull, his breathing shallow, his temperature dropping. "He's fine earlier, then suddenly crashed," Emily reported. Sarah quickly examined the puppy. His gums were pale, his heartbeat rapid but weak. "Could be internal bleeding we missed on the initial scan. Let's get him prepped for emergency surgery." As they worked to stabilize the puppy, Sarah was vaguely aware of a commotion outside, scratching, then a soft growl she recognized immediately. "Is that?" Emily began. "Moi," Sarah confirmed, astonished. "But how did he get out again?" The scratching at the door grew more insistent. Concerned about what other mischief the escaped bear might cause, Sarah carefully transferred Pip to Emily's care and went to investigate. When she opened the door, she found Moi sitting just outside, his dark eyes fixed on her intently. Behind him, the evening sky was painted in spectacular shades of orange and pink as the sun set behind the mountains. "How do you keep escaping?" Sarah murmured, automatically checking for signs that he might have the missing brooch. Moki made a soft chuffing sound, then turned and took a few steps away before looking back at her expectantly, the same behavior he'd exhibited during the incident with the space heater. "You want me to follow you again?" Sarah was torn between the urgency of Pip's condition and the strange behavior of the bear cub. "Emily, will you be okay for a few minutes?" "Go," Emily urged. "I'll call Mike for backup with Pip." Feeling as though she'd fallen into some surreal dream, Sarah followed Moi across the sanctuary grounds. Thankfully, most of the gala guests were gathered in the pavilion for dinner, so no one witnessed the bizarre procession of a woman following a bear cub through the twilight. To her surprise, Moki didn't lead her back to his own enclosure. Instead, he headed toward the rear of the property to a storage shed that housed extra bedding and supplies for the smaller mammals. The shed door was ajar, another mystery, as it should have been locked. Moki paused at the entrance, looking up at Sarah. "What is it, boy?" she asked softly, feeling ridiculous for speaking to him as if he were a domestic dog, but unable to help herself. Moi entered the shed, and Sarah cautiously followed, flicking on her flashlight. The beam revealed a scene that stopped her in her tracks. In the corner of the shed, behind stacked bales of straw, Moi had created an elaborate nest unlike any she'd seen in his enclosure. This one was carefully constructed with soft materials, towels, a fleece blanket, even what appeared to be an old sweater of Hank's. Nestled in the center, arranged with what could only be described as artistic care, were Moki's most prized scented treasures: a dried orange peel, a lavender sachet, a coffee-stained napkin, an old baseball cap that smelled faintly of aftershave, and Mrs. Ainsworth's pearl brooch, the moonlight-colored gem gleaming in the flashlight beam. "You brilliant, impossible creature," Sarah whispered, reaching carefully for the brooch. Moki made no move to stop her, watching with what seemed like satisfaction as she retrieved the precious item. But the surprises weren't over. As Sarah's flashlight swept the nest again, she noticed something she'd missed initially: a small opening in the wall behind the nest leading to the adjacent building, which happened to be the quarantine facility where Pip was being treated. Understanding dawned. Somehow, Moki had sensed Pip's presence and distress. The nest wasn't just another collection point for scented treasures, it was positioned near the alien puppy, as if Moki were standing guard over another orphaned creature. "You've been checking on him," Sarah realized, remembering how Moki's behavior had changed when Pip arrived. "That's why you've been restless, why you keep escaping. You knew he was alone and scared, just like you were." The bear cub made a soft sound, almost like a purr, and nudged the nest with his nose. Sarah's walkie-talkie crackled, breaking the moment. It was Mike, his voice tight with concern. "Sarah, where are you? Emily says Pip's condition is stabilizing, but Mrs. Ainsworth is asking about the brooch. The speeches are about to start." "I have it," Sarah replied, relief evident in her voice. "Tell her I'm on my way. And Mike, you won't believe where I found it." When Sarah returned to the pavilion, brooch in hand, she found the gala in full swing. Dinner had been served, wine was flowing, and the atmosphere was festive despite the earlier mishap. Mrs. Ainsworth was seated at the head table, engaged in conversation with one of the board members. When she saw Sarah approaching, she excused herself and met her halfway. "You found it," she said, her eyes lighting up at the sight of the brooch in Sarah's palm. "Yes, and you won't believe the story behind it," Sarah said, quickly recounting what she'd discovered in the storage shed. As she spoke, Mrs. Ainsworth's expression transformed from polite interest to genuine wonder. "Are you saying this bear cub created a special nest near the injured puppy and placed my brooch there?" "I know it sounds incredible," Sarah admitted. "I can't explain it scientifically, but I've worked with wildlife for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like Moki's behavior." Mrs. Ainsworth studied Sarah's face as if searching for signs of exaggeration or manipulation. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "I believe you," she said simply. "My late husband used to say that we understand so little about the emotional lives of animals. He was a businessman first, but in his heart, he was a naturalist. It's why I continue to support places like Wild at Heart." She paused, then added softly, "May I see this special nest?" "Of course," Sarah agreed, surprised but pleased by the request. "After the speeches, I'd be happy to show you." The formal program went better than Sarah could have hoped. The silent auction raised nearly $200,000, and individual donations brought the total close to $300,000. When it came time for Mrs. Ainsworth to speak, Sarah held her breath, still worried that the brooch incident might have dampened the benefactor's enthusiasm. She needn't have worried. Mrs. Ainsworth took the stage, the recovered brooch gleaming at her collar, and delivered a speech that left many guests wiping away tears. "We came here tonight to support a sanctuary for wild creatures," she said, her voice strong despite her years. "But what I've witnessed today has reminded me that sometimes these animals we think we're saving are actually offering us salvation in return." She went on to share the story of Moki, his traumatic beginning, his unusual habit of collecting scented items, and finally the discovery of his special nest near the ailing puppy. This little bear, who lost everything, somehow found the capacity to care about another creature's suffering. Mrs. Ainsworth concluded, "If that isn't a lesson for all of us, I don't know what is." She paused, her gaze sweeping the crowd. "That's why I'm not just matching tonight's donations, I'm doubling them." A murmur of surprise and delight rippled through the audience, followed by enthusiastic applause. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she calculated the impact, over $1 million for the sanctuary's expansion. After the speeches, as promised, Sarah led Mrs. Ainsworth to see Moki's special nest. The bear cub had been returned to his proper enclosure, but the nest remained undisturbed in the storage shed. "Extraordinary," Mrs. Ainsworth murmured, kneeling despite her age to examine the careful arrangement of scented items. "And you say he created a similar nest in his own enclosure?" "Several," Sarah confirmed, "but this is the most elaborate and the only one containing something so valuable." Mrs. Ainsworth touched the spot where the brooch had been placed. "It wasn't the value he cared about," she said softly. "It was the scent, my perfume, and the connection to Pip, the puppy." Sarah added, "We've moved Pip to a recovery area visible from Moki's enclosure. The difference in Moki's behavior is remarkable. He's calmer, more focused. They recognize something in each other." Mrs. Ainsworth suggested, "Fellow survivors." Later that night, after the last guests had departed and the sanctuary settled into quietness, Sarah made one final check on their two special charges. Pip, now stabilized and resting comfortably after treatment, had been placed in a large crate near the front of Moki's enclosure, close enough for visual contact but far enough for safety. The puppy slept peacefully, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Moki, meanwhile, had dragged his blankets to the edge of the enclosure closest to Pip. The bear cub wasn't sleeping, instead, he maintained a quiet vigil, his dark eyes fixed on the recovering puppy. As Sarah watched, Moki carefully placed a lavender sachet at the edge of his blanket nest, positioning it so it faced Pip's crate. The gesture was so deliberate, so seemingly thoughtful, that Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. "You really do understand, don't you?" she whispered. Moki looked up at the sound of her voice, his intelligent eyes meeting hers. In that moment, Sarah felt the artificial boundary between human and animal blur just a little. This wasn't just anthropomorphism or wishful thinking. It was recognition of a shared emotional experience that transcended species. "Thank you," she told him softly, "for reminding all of us why we do this work." The bear cub made a soft chuffing sound before returning his attention to Pip, resuming his self-appointed guardianship. Sarah left them to their quiet communion, her heart full. The path ahead for Moki would not be simple. He would grow larger, potentially more dangerous, and his unusual attachment to humans would complicate any future release plans. But tonight had confirmed what she'd suspected from the beginning: Moki wasn't just another rescue. He was a bridge between wild and tame, between animal instinct and something remarkably like compassion. Under the vast Montana sky, stars twinkling like scattered diamonds, Wild at Heart's sanctuary continued its quiet work of healing. At its heart was an orphaned bear cub who collected scented treasures and had unwittingly gathered something far more precious. A community of humans and animals bound together by understanding, respect, and the shared experience of finding family in the most unexpected places. In the months that followed, Moki's fame grew. Visitors came from across the country hoping to catch a glimpse of the collector of Wild at Heart, the bear who saved a puppy and stole a pearl. Children sent him drawings and letters, which Sarah read aloud during his feeding times. Pip, fully recovered, became a permanent resident of the sanctuary and Moki's constant companion. Though they could never share an enclosure, their living spaces were designed to allow visual contact, and their bond continued to flourish in ways that challenged conventional understanding of interspecies relationships. The sanctuary expanded thanks to Mrs. Ainsworth's generosity, adding specialized habitats for more endangered species and a state-of-the-art veterinary facility that Emily would eventually direct after completing her studies. And Moki? He remained the sanctuary's mischief maker, still occasionally collecting items left too close to his enclosure. But now, when visitors lost a scarf or a handkerchief, they considered it an honor rather than an inconvenience. Each item became part of a growing legend, the story of a bear who found healing not in the wilderness, but in the scented treasures of the human world, and who taught those humans something profound about connection in return. Sarah often reflected on Mrs. Ainsworth's words from that pivotal night. Sometimes these animals we think we're saving are actually offering us salvation in return. In Moki's case, truer words had never been spoken.